So I wanted to discuss the question of why borderline personality disorder is so traumatic. Why is it such a horrific experience? Bear in mind, this video and this channel is primarily devoted to non-borderlines who have been in or are currently in a romantic relationship with somebody who has full-on borderline personality disorder. I'm not just talking about somebody who has borderline tendencies or your problem girlfriend. We're talking about somebody who is very far on the spectrum of borderline. And if you've never experienced it, it is an extremely traumatic event. And this video is not intended to demonize or beat up on borderlines. Quite the opposite. In fact, what I want to talk about in this video is why it is so incredibly traumatic to deal with. So bear in mind that everything in the universe and everything in human experience, based on my understanding, is projection. So if you don't know what psychological projection is, look it up. And it basically means that we project onto the world our own internal experience. There's a psychological projection that happens when, let's say, somebody's a serial cheater and they are constantly jealous of their partner's phone, and they have to look and see, I have to check your phone and I have to hack your email to see who you've been talking to. I know you're cheating on me. And they do that because they themselves are cheating, and on an unconscious level internally they have a lot of conflict and a lot of guilt over that, so they project it onto the people that are around them. That is the technical idea of psychological projection. And this is something that borderlines do. When borderlines split, when they go from idealizing you and then they switch to hating you and discarding you, that's because of their projection. They're projecting onto the codependent their own fears of rejection. So they end up acting out what they're afraid is going to happen to them. And so we need to understand from a spiritual perspective that everything in the universe, from our experience, is in fact some form of projection. If you have problems in your world, if you have physical issues in your body, if you are poor, if you're rich, if you're happy, sad, it's because you are projecting from an unconscious level, meaning you're not aware of it. You are projecting onto your world your internal unconscious reality. Remember, unconscious means you're not aware of it. So this is the problem. If borderlines were able to be conscious of the fact that, oh my God, I am so afraid of being abandoned right now, and I am overreacting to something my partner did or didn't do, and this is really my problem, it has nothing to do with them, then they can reach out and they can say, I'm scared, will you hold me and tell me that you love me? But instead, because it's unconscious projection, what they do is all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're taken over by this knowledge, this awareness that, oh my God, that person is doing it to me. They are planning to destroy my life, and so they act from that perspective. And of course, none of it is true. So the reason why, maybe borderlines may not understand. One of the things that's happened, this channel's been around for 4 months now, and in that time there have been a few borderlines that have shown up, and as you can imagine, they don't like my perspective, especially if you look at my older videos when I was just coming out of the relationship and I was trying to work through it and I was in so much pain. They respond very negatively, very nastily. Some of them will just say really mean, abusive things to me. And of course, I just block them because I'm not interested in that. And then I've seen a couple other borderlines show up who don't get so abusive about it, but they want to give their side of the story about what's really going on. And I get all kinds of different experiences from other codependents. There are some that are really angry and they want to turn the borderline into a mean, horrible, evil person that is planning out the demise, and they know exactly what they're doing. And then there's the other codependents that want to chime in and defend the borderline and say they can't help it, and you have to, you realize that there's a spectrum, and so they have to somehow they need to come in and defend the borderline. And my perspective has only been to talk about what I need to see or understand or believe in order for me to separate and to heal. So as I've said in some of the recent videos to borderlines here, I'm not a borderline, so I can't know firsthand what it's like to be in your shoes. I'm also not a psychologist, so I'm not trying to talk from a psychological perspective of what we know. I'm trying to share a personal experience for non-borderlines codependents who are working to regain their sense of self. And sometimes we need to see things in a certain way that may or may not be 100% accurate, because it helps us. It helps us to regain our strength and to have the strength to set boundaries and to leave the relationship if necessary. And so there may be times when I take an extreme view and I say something in a very extreme way, but it's not intended to harm anybody or make somebody out to be a villain. It's so that people can heal. But now let's take a centrist approach. Let's not be borderline. Let's not be codependent. Let's just talk about projection. And when you understand projection, you understand why borderline personality disorder is extremely, extremely traumatic for everybody involved. And that's because we have to first look at what happened to the borderline. So as I understand borderline personality disorder, when the borderline was an infant, sometimes as early as 3 months old, very, very early on, there was some traumatic event. It could have been as simple as simply being discarded. I heard of a story of, I talked to a woman who had an adopted sister who was abandoned at 3 months of age. That's why I'm focusing on 3 months, because that's really early. That shocked me to hear that. And after that 3 months, that child was taken in and adopted and loved and taken care of. And that child went on to develop borderline personality disorder. And so that means that whatever happened at 3 months of age when that child was discarded, whatever the trauma of being discarded or perhaps abused or perhaps neglected, or who knows what it was. Maybe child was left alone for a couple of days, who knows. Something was very traumatic, and of course, being 3 months old, that child doesn't have the memory to be able to recall and tell us what happened. But that girl grew up to be borderline. And so what we know is that the borderlines experience some very serious trauma when they're either an infant and or when they're a toddler. And it could be as simple as just being neglected. I can't imagine a worse. I mean, I'm sure there are, but that on a psychological level, an infant is so vulnerable and so needy. I mean, that's all an infant is. An infant is pure need. Infants are also extremely, extremely sensitive to any input. Energetic, psychological, physical, sounds, touch, hot and cold, light and dark. I mean, they're just a raw nerve. And so whatever trauma they're going through, they're just this bundle of need. And so you can imagine that. Now, my experience with the borderline that I knew is that she was like that. She said that everything was just extremely intense for her. You know, any look on my face, any sound of my voice, anybody, somebody could just, have a bit of gas and just sort of wince like that. For her, it would have been as though that person stood in front of her and yelled at her and called her horrible names. And so, I've heard that this is true in general for borderlines. They're incredibly, incredibly sensitive to everything. And so they experience everything intensely, exactly as an infant would. And so what has happened is that whatever trauma happened to them at a very, very early age, it has arrested much of their mental, psychological, emotional, and probably nervous development. Their nervous system probably is arrested at that age, 3 months, 2 years, whatever it is. And so they're going through life as an adult with this constant experience of a traumatized infant, full of need, right? So that you need to understand that. So when you're talking to your borderline and they happen to be functional and they are sounding intelligent and they have good vocabulary and they seem to really be able to communicate emotionally, they seem to really be able to talk on an abstract level and talk about the future and the past and talk in ways that you associate with a fully developed an adult human. That's one of the reasons why it is so incredibly confusing and traumatizing when they completely flip in completely unexpected, from our perspective, irrational ways. This is different from just your average narcissist who suffers from probably the exact same symptoms or cause, but they've developed different defense mechanisms for it. And so they plan out your demise. So narcissists are planning your demise. They see you as the enemy and they see you as something they can consume and destroy and use, and they get off on how much they've harmed you. That's different. Borderline's not doing that. The borderline is coming just from that place of total need. So some people have called borderlines, let me see if I can remember the term, vulnerable narcissists, meaning they have the same cause that causes narcissistic personality disorder, except that they don't have the defense mechanism, so they're more vulnerable, right? So they're more in touch with that feeling of being completely needy and vulnerable all the time. So what this has to do with the point of this video is that we project everything of our internal experience onto our external world. And so whatever it is that's going on inside of you will be in your world. That's why there are no victims. Whatever scenario that has come to you where you can look at yourself and say, oh, I am a victim of circumstance, and every one of us could nod our head and say, yeah, that wasn't your fault. From a spiritual perspective, that was already the case internally, and you unconsciously manifested it in your outside world so that you could see with your eyes and your ears and feel what is actually going on inside. It's a way for your unconscious to try to bring to your attention what's really happening. So we do this in relationships. We project onto others, meaning we seek consciously and unconsciously to have the other person experience what we experience internally. This is why if you're with somebody who's healthy, who's been loved, who is a loving person, who has a strong identity, who all of that, they make you feel good. They are kind to you, they're generous to you, they forgive you, they seek to give you the experience that they have inside of themselves, which is happiness and joy and comfort and peace and all those other things. So that means that we are seeking to project our experience on whomever we're with. Codependents, they relate to the borderline in that they are also needy, they are also damaged, they've been traumatized, they're also probably got some arrested development on some level. They don't have it to the extreme or in the same ways that the borderline does. But they're seeking to give the borderline the experience that they have. That's why codependents are, they give everything. They give everything that they have to the borderline, even at the expense of their own health, because they're trying to project onto the borderline how much what they want. They want somebody to do that for them. They want somebody to love them just with 1,000,000,000% of love and not stop, which is why in the beginning the codependent and the borderline are such a good match, because the borderline is love bombing them, is idealizing them and giving them just unbelievable amounts of love, even though it's not true love. So that's why the codependent gets so attached, because they're trying to recreate what was happening initially. Now, the end result is what is most important with a borderline. With a borderline, if they are untreated and they have a serious case of borderline personality disorder and they're not aware and they're not seeking to, really consciously hardcore seeking to get better, then what's going to happen, what will happen, what is guaranteed will happen, even if it takes years, at some point they will create a scenario where the codependent will be at their most vulnerable possible. Like the intimacy and the connection and the love and the attachment will be so great within the codependent, and will be needing and expecting so much from the borderline, that when that person is at their absolute deepest, most vulnerable, needy, loving, just like a little infant, that they can possibly be manipulated into or have, be induced into, that is when the borderline will bring down the final blow and destroy the relationship and destroy the essence of the person, to the point where that ending of the relationship will be the worst possible betrayal that could have been done to them. That is so that the codependent can have a feeling as much as possible to understand what the borderline is experiencing all the time on an unconscious level. Now, this is not happening on a conscious level. The borderline has not planned it out. I've said it in another video that they plan out your demise. I'm really talking about on an unconscious level. Unconscious means you're not aware of it. Be clear of that. The borderline absolutely consciously believes what they are doing. When my ex discarded me the last time, it was everything that I just described, and she absolutely believed that I was insidiously planning her demise, that I was seeking to gaslight her, and I was seeking to destroy her self-esteem and to destroy her sense of self and to destroy her plans for her future, to destroy her plans for her business. I mean, that I had become this person who was the most toxic individual, who was planning to destroy her on the deepest level. And for her to do that, and all the things that led up to that, and I've shared with that. I won't go into that, but basically, days before, I was in an extremely emotionally vulnerable place, and I begged and pleaded for her love and for her help, which she gave, just unreservedly love bombed me. offered me her car, said, "You can come live with me. We'll be friends forever. I'm so sorry I did this." Holding me, and wiping the tears off my face, and just really taking care of me so that I felt so loved and so safe and so secure that I'd finally found somebody who could give me all the things I wanted. And then to go literally on Christmas Day when I'm all alone in a strange country with nobody I know, and then she's saying, "I can't have anything to do with you. You're the worst person that's ever existed." And to accuse me of all these things that I never did, on Christmas Day, all by myself. It was horrible. It was the worst abusive betrayal of trust that anybody in my whole life has ever done to me in one fell swoop, and that's saying a lot. Now, some people listen to this and they think that I'm just complaining and sour grapes. I have no anger towards her. I have no sadness. I mean, to be honest, the only reason that I remember all this is because I've seen this channel, and this channel is really taking off and people are really benefiting from it. So I want to keep it going because, I want to be helpful. And, this is a real opportunity. So I'm going to keep this channel going. But if I weren't involved in, trying to keep this channel going, I would have forgotten. The only reason I remember a lot of it is because I'm watching and reading people's comments and going, "Oh yeah," means I did the work to heal myself. So when I share with you how traumatic it was for me, it's not because I need to relive it or I'm thinking about it every day. I mean, you can tell by my affect, it really just doesn't bother me anymore. It's almost like it happened to somebody else. It didn't. It happened to me, but I mean, it would be very easy for me to forget that it even happened because it was only for a few months. So, some of you who have been with your wife or your husband for years and had kids with them, and you've been through far more devastating things than I have, the point that is most important to understand is that, and for the borderlines, if you wonder why you hurt people, those of you who are aware and you know that you hurt all the people that have loved you and come into your life, what's happening is that you are unconsciously seeking to have them understand and feel what you feel all the time underneath the surface. So that's why it's really important to be able to go to therapy and have a therapist help you become conscious of your own pain, so that you don't have to unconsciously project it onto others and unconsciously seduce them into feeling safe so that then you can discard them. Now, you're not choosing to do that. It's happening unconsciously. Consciously, you think that they're after you and you're doing it to protect yourself. But that's why. And so what the main theme that brings both the codependent and the borderline together is the core issue of the horrific need that's not being met. And it's a horrific need. I myself, I can relate to a lot of things that I think borderlines go through. Not all of it. I myself was born premature, at least 6 weeks premature. And what they did, back when I was born in 1963, is they did this really weird thing where they would separate the child from the mother and put it into an incubator and by itself. And so for however many weeks I was in an incubator without any love or any, human contact. And it did a number on me. It wasn't until I was in my 50s, I'm 56 now, it wasn't until I was 52 that I was able to actually feel safe enough to sleep all night in the same bed with another person. Because up until then, it was just too, my experience was I couldn't shut down because I could hear and feel all of their thoughts and feelings, and it was too intense for me, and I needed to sleep by myself all the time. It was like I was going back into an incubator so I could be alone. Took me a really long time to fall in love enough to be able to trust and be able to spend the night in the same bed with another person. So I can understand the being neglected. I can understand a lot of other things that happened when I was a kid. So I have some idea. But I can remember when I was with my ex, my the borderline when I was still in it and I was still attached and I was still addicted, but I had done enough research on borderline personality disorder to know how horrific it was. That what she must be going through and was incapable of consciously comprehending, how horrific it was for her. And that was one of the worst feelings I ever had, was to feel that and want so badly to go and fix that in her. You know, it was horrible. I had this hole in my gut and nothing made me comfortable. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I was so anxious all the time and I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a clear idea of where my life was going and who I was, which is completely antithetical to who I am. And of course, that was my projection. I was, you know, her borderline illness and, you know, our codependent relationship brought up to my awareness some of the really, really deep need within me that had never been addressed, and it was horrible. So of course I projected that onto her and needed to fix her. But what was really going on is I was wanting that for myself. I was projecting that. So that's the bottom line. Listen, borderline personality disorder, I mean, I can't imagine a worse experience for anybody. So, you know, borderlines, I know that it's hard to listen to non-borderlines talk about the trauma that they've been through by being with you. And I know that you want to defend yourself and say, you know, why are you guys just beating us up? Don't you see we're the ones that have the problem? That's all very true. And I'm acknowledging that from what I can tell, like I said, I wouldn't wish a borderline personality disorder on anybody for even 10 minutes. It's just horrific. It's horrible. And but at the same time, what you're doing is you're unconsciously projecting onto those that love you. You're projecting onto them and making them feel how you feel. So imagine you at your worst, how horrible it feels to feel discarded, rejected, unloved, alone, all, you know, the worst possible feelings. Imagine making somebody else feel like that. That's really what's happening. And it's happening to somebody who hasn't felt it. So imagine the pain that you feel, and imagine somebody not having felt pain to that degree, and you are forcing them to feel it and then rejecting them. So that's the other thing that I experienced, was that when I was able to consciously comprehend how horrible it was for her, which made me, of course, being the codependent, want to love her all the more and take care of her all the more. To be discarded, you know, after that was even more horrific and more painful. So if you are borderline, first off, let me talk to the codependents. If you are codependent, you cannot heal yourself. You cannot fix the borderline. You are the worst thing for them. You will not help them. You will keep them in a state of arrested development. You will not help them heal. And they are keeping you arrested in your unresolved codependent issues as well. You need to see a therapist, and you need to go to, in my suggestion is to go to Codependence Anonymous, work the 12 steps with a sponsor. You can't fix yourself. You need other people to help you. For the borderline, you know, you need professional help. I don't know, because I'm not borderline. I keep hearing what the difference is, but I also hear that borderlines, some of it works and the other stuff doesn't. So I can't tell you where to go, other than you need to find somebody qualified to help you so that you can feel better and so that you can find love. The damage that was done to me by my ex, even if she got healthy and got put together and came back to me, I wouldn't be able to ever let her back in, because of the degree to which she damaged and discarded and betrayed my trust. It was just went beyond a point of, you know, there's no repairing that. I love her. I have nothing against her. I forgive her, and I'm not angry with her, and I want nothing but happiness for her, but I could never trust her again. I'm telling you this so that you can have a reason to go and decide to get help, so that you won't take your pain and force it on somebody else and destroy an opportunity to have somebody give you what you truly want, which is love. And from what I understand, borderlines, if they go through proper therapy, can actually recover and have satisfying relationships. So there it is. Borderline. The reason why borderline personality disorder is so traumatic for the non-borderline is because at some point the non-borderline will be forced to feel how horrific it is for the borderline. And that's because that's what we do. We project onto other people our internal reality, and it's unavoidable. All right, that's it. See you guys soon.